Hello, we're going to talk about securing Windows 10, particularly how we handle authorization in the Windows environment. So I'm going to click on the slideshow, authorization in Windows 10, and let's get started. So again, we talked about authentication, knowing who you are. And another important concept in security is now that I know who you are, what are you allowed to do? To be followed by, and later what we'll talk about is I'm going to record everything you do as well. But right now that I think I know who you are through authentication, how am I going to make sure you can only do what you're supposed to do? Now, in the world of Windows, we're going to use NTFS permissions, which we'll get into, file and folder permissions here, as you can see. But right away, let me talk about groups, because NTFS permissions are very powerful. They're very nuanced, which, if you think in a business environment, makes a lot of sense. For anyone that's worked in a business environment, they can tell you that there's a lot of, well, lack of a better word, politics. There's a lot of there's lots of nuance, okay? Some in accounting can edit the file, some in accounting cannot edit the file. They can read the file, but they can't edit it. But there's other people that can edit it. There can be a fair amount of nuance. Now, not that Linux permissions can't handle that, but Linux permissions kind of make that a little bit difficult. With NTFS permissions, we can be a lot more, a lot more precise in our permissions, or also contradictory in our permissions, which is important in the real world. But that all hinges on using groups. We need to use groups. Now, you can go ahead and assign permissions to NTFS, and I should, as I'm talking, I'm going to boot up my virtual machine, which I forgot to do before I started. Sorry about that. So we can assign permissions to a specific user. It's not difficult to do. Matter of fact, it's almost too easy to do. In the real world, with any experienced administrator in Windows would tell you that the smart move is to do it to groups. Why? Because with groups we can it's a lot easier to take a user out of a single group. So let's say we have a group that's in a bunch of different files and folders to give read or access or write access to someone. And let's just say that user is no longer working at the company, right? It's a lot easier for us to go and take a user out of a group than to go to every single file and folder and remember every single file and folder that user is in and take them out from that file or folder. All right? Groups are the way to assign authentication in Windows, all right, at a professional level. Now, on a technical, personal level, you're sitting at home, you only have 3 users, or you're sitting in a small office, Soho, small office, home office, as it's called. It might just be easier to assign permissions to an individual or to to assign permissions to an individual because you only have 5 different users. That's fine, I suppose. As someone that's worked in a large company, I can tell you that it makes much more sense and it's going to be better for your sanity in the long run to use groups. So let's talk about groups. Groups are a major concept of authorization in Windows 10. All right. So we have default groups, which tend not to get used that often, except for when we're talking about the local desktop. We have access control assistance operators. Members of this group can access authorization attributes and permissions for resources on this computer. And there's no remote, there's no default members of this group. So again, this is just primarily to access the attributes and permissions for certain resources. All right. An important group is administrators. Okay, administrators is the highest, most permissible group there is in Windows. Members of this group have full access to the computer. The local administrator account is always a member of this group. The initial account created during installation is also a member by default. So as you're installing Windows, you know how they ask for that initial user. It's going to be automatically made a member of the administrator's group. If a computer has joined a domain, the domain admins group is also a member of this group. So by the way, oh yeah, just a FYI, groups can be members of groups. So that can complicate things. It's also a powerful tool. Making domain admins a member of the local administrators group provides centralized control of domain computers. Again, if you join a domain, that computer belongs to the domain. The domain admin has full control over that machine. So, guests, another group is guests. Members of this group have the same access to the system as members of the users group. Members are able to sign in and save files, but not able to change system settings or install programs. The exception to this, of course, is the guest account, which has additional restrictions. We talked about that last lesson. All right. We also have the users. So guest is a member of the guest group, by the way. So if you wanted to give the guest access to something, you could give something to the guest group. We have users. Members can operate the computer and save files, but cannot install programs, modify user accounts, share resources, or alter system settings. All user accounts created on the system are members of this group by default. In addition, the system accounts NT authority authenticated users and NT. By the way, this authenticated users is going to pop up, so pay attention to that. And NT authority inactive are members of this group. And in domain environment, the domain users group is also a member. So I mentioned this authenticated users because all authenticated users are automatically going to be given permissions to the file system. So if you're an authenticated user, we do think we know who you are and you've signed in, then you're going to have certain permissions. We'll see that pop up in a lab, so I'm just giving you a heads up. Power users, members of this group, have almost all administrative permissions. It's common in previous versions of Windows to use this group for all users to ensure they could make changes to their systems. Bad idea. Don't do that anymore. In Windows 10, this group has been depreciated, and Microsoft recommends using it only when necessary to support legacy software. All right, so legacy applications. Keep in mind, power users is there as a fall gap. All right, to a fallback. All right, to give you the ability to give users a little bit more authentication, to put them in power users, so they might be able to run some software that might be, that's the word I'm looking for, a little past its prime. All right, so if we have software that hasn't been written properly and we need to give a user a little bit more authorization in order to run that software, you can put them in power users, although they really do not prefer you do that very often, okay? Because it gives them a little too much permission to write to program files and various parts of the hard drive that users are not should not have the ability to write to. All right. Remote desktop users, members of this group can sign in remotely by using remote desktop. This group has no members by default. So if you want to be able to connect up via remote desktop, you have to become a member of the remote desktop users. If anywhere in a company you see individual users, it's a lot of times here. But ideally, again, you use groups and you would assign a group under this group. And that group would then have access to remote desktop into this machine. There's also other groups: event log readers, Hyper-V administrators, IIS users, network configuration operators, performance log users, performance monitor users, desktop users, replicator, system management accounts group. I'm not going to force you to memorize these. I'm just letting you know these groups do exist. They do have certain permissions that are allowed to. Obviously, like IIS users would have write access to or read access to parts of the hard drive that house web pages. Network configurator operators can actually configure some settings in the network configuration. Event log readers can read the event log. But just letting you know those groups do exist as default groups. All right, so important concept and really needs to get hammered home. In NTFS, every file or folder, so we're talking about the NTFS, NT file system. So in the NT file system, every file or folder has an access control list. which is made up of ACEs, access control entries, okay? So access control list is this, right? Let me drag over my, let's drag over my virtual machine, right? And if I open up File Explorer, come on, auto adjust, there we go. So if I bring up File Explorer, and let's go to our good friend backups. We got this file right here, properties. If I go to security, right here, this is my ACL, okay? Not my entire ACL, because I can click on advanced and there's going to be extra special access, right? And this is me goofing around, by the way. A lot of these settings here are things that I've put in, so by default you wouldn't see these. But here's authenticated users, by the way. Anyway, so so this is the ACL, okay? This and particularly this. These are the ACL, okay? It's made up of ACEs, which is a line. Simply, it's a deny or allow, one or the other, right? Let's go back to the more simplified version. So if I click on users, for example, users are allowed to read and execute and to read this file, okay? As compared to guests, which they're denied. Right? They're denied full control, they're denied modify, they're denied read and execute, they're denied read, write, and special permissions. All right. So that is an ACL. All right. So let's talk about the permissions and what they mean. Okay. Oh, by the way, this is considered the basic building block of Windows NT security. It is important to talk about user access control and various other aspects, but this is the fundamental building block. Okay, the fact that we can control what a user has read or write access to every single file in the entire operating system is the building block of security. Okay, so standard permissions. We have write permissions. Folders, you can create and create files and folders. And so if I have the right permission on a folder, I can create files or folders and modify attributes. Files, data in the file might be changed, and we can also modify the attributes. Remember, attributes are not ACLs. Attributes are that hidden archive. What's some of the other ones? Not archive, but we have hidden and we have unable to save changes. So those basic attributes. It's not an ACL. Okay. Standard permissions, we have read, data can be viewed, and then finally, well, for the basic one, we have list, which is folder contents, a folder only. It'll list contents. We also read and execute for folders. It's a combination of list and read. For files, data, read data, and if executable, we can execute. Modify, both a combination of writing and read and execute. Full control, which is I can modify and change permissions and take ownership. We'll talk about ownership in 2 seconds. And then we have special permissions as well on top of that, right? We'll talk about that. So there are, let's talk about special permissions. So let's pick on my Stripe drive. And we got renders here. Okay, very simple. So I'm going to click on properties and let's look at security. So this is going to be a bare bones basic thing. Okay. If you remember special permissions, so right now as it stands, users are allowed to read and execute, list folder contents, and read. So they can't write, they can't modify, right? And they don't have any special permissions. If we want to change that, we go to users, and we can add, let's select a principal. Principal is any kind of user or group. So let's go with a group of users. Okay. So we're going to allow users to, well, apply it to folders and subfolders. So we're going to show advanced permissions. These are the special permissions. Okay. Take ownership. You could allow someone to take ownership, but not the ability to write, right? You can, as a separate thing. I know it's kind of confusing, but we have extra complexity. This is the complexity that's both the ugly side of NTFS and the beautiful side of NTFS. If anyone's used it in the real world, you'll know that often you have to kind of mold file permissions into the real world situation, and a lot of these tools allow you to do that. All right, and so these are the special permissions I was talking about. All right, let's get back to the lesson. So ownership, by the way, if I click back on this, if I click on advanced again, I'll see ownership. The owner is CIT 120 admin. the user we created, and I can change it. See how I can click change? I can change my owner. I would just have to select an object name to put in there. So let's just say we want to make users. So the owner now is the group users, right? Which is not ideal. So I'm going to change it back. But and I'll cancel them on top of that. So the change never happened. Anyway, so point is ownership. So whoever the owner is going to have the ability. The owner is going to have the ability to change permissions by default. Okay. So the owner is always going to have that backup plan. So if I sat there and I created a special thing where I said CIT 120 Inc. Admin, a specific user, I know I'm not supposed to put that in there, and we're going to deny. We're going to just deny everything, right? I hit apply. So once I've done that, now I can't get into renders, right? Because I'm CIT 120 admin. It should not allow me. I don't have access to permission to access this folder, right? If I right click and go to properties, though, I can always come back in and delete this, right? Remove, because I'm the owner, okay? I can't get locked out. If I wasn't the owner, I wouldn't be able to do that, all right? So that's the power of ownership. Also, keep in mind it also counts towards your auditing for space, for your space control, how much hard drive space you take. So, all right. So let's talk about permission scope. Again, full permissions can get inherited. All right, so we're gonna have terms like parent folder. A parent folder is the folder that the file is in. So if I create a new file, we're just doing tests. So this is test. Its parent folder is renders, whose parent folder is the S drive itself. Right, the S drive itself contains the folder renders, so therefore the S drive is the parent of renders. And by the way, I can set permissions at the S drive level. So if I go to the S drive and right click and go to properties, there is a place to set permissions there. All right, so I have permissions there, and the S drive is the parent of renders, and renders is the parent of test. Okay, now the fun part about it is permissions get pushed down. So if I go to properties and let's add a permission. So if I click on users and let's deny, if I click deny modify, everything's going to go over. So what ends up happening is, because modify is more powerful, notice how the arrows kind of come over, but I can deny write, right? I can deny write privileges. So let me hit apply on this. Right, yes. Okay, so I hit OK. I hit OK. I think it might not get pushed down to test, because test was already created. Let's see. If I go to users, nope, deny popped down. So it got inherited. This is what we call an inheritance. All right. So what happened was when I clicked deny, that inheritance came down to test. So now, if I was logged in as a standard user, I wouldn't have the ability to write to this test file. Okay. Now I can. So just keep that in mind. That's inheritance. All right. So permission inheritance. Permissions can be inherited directly or directly assigned. So if we have an inherited permission, when we say permission, that can be allow or deny. It can be inherited or directly assigned. If it's directly assigned, we call it an explicit permission. Okay, it's an explicit permission. All right. So permissions can either be allowed or denied. Permissions can be applied to groups. And any member of that group receives those permissions. So every member of a group gets to receive that permission. Users can be members in multiple groups that have different permissions to the same object. Yes, it can get confusing. I can be a member of Group A, and Group A cannot write to the file, but Group B is allowed to write to the file. And I'm a member of both groups. So in general, deny permissions generally, so I repeated myself there. Deny permissions generally take precedence over allow permissions. Permissions applied directly to an object take precedence over permissions inherited. So if I have an explicit permit, but a inherited deny, guess who's going to win? The explicit permit is going to win. So going back to my example over here, if I go into test, we have users. So I don't know. I'm trying to remember who's a member of users. Our good friend ABC PU is a member of both. So if I sit there and, well, unfortunately, let's call it test right. We're going to create a new group. I'm trying to keep an eye on time here. All right, so we're going to create a new group. Let's go to computer management. Thinking. It's thinking. It's thinking. It's getting there. It got there. All right. So we're going to create a new group called test management. So new group, test MMG. All right. And then we add some members. We're going to add our good friend PE, and actually I think ABC, or I'm sorry, ABC. ABC PU is a user. Hit create. There it is. I don't know if ABC. Okay, ABC PU is a member of users. So now they're a member of test management and they're a member of users. Fantastic. All right. Well, what happens if I go into test and I go to properties and I edit and I add that group of test management? I think it was MMG. All right. And I give them the ability to write. It's allowed. Apply. All right. So now I have this one, which is it's an explicit did I say explicit before? Implicit permit. So we have a permit that's directly applied to this file from test management, right? And I have a deny that was inherited. Well, a deny should take precedence over allow. However, because this was implicitly assigned, in other words, it's assigned directly to the file, that's going to win. And I can prove that by going to Advanced again and clicking on Effective Access. Select a user. Let's pick our friend ABC PU, power user. And let's check it out. If I click Effective Access, can they write? They can write to it. Right? Why can they write to it? Because they have because an implicit permit will beat out an inherited deny. All right, that's why that wins out. That's why that functions like you would expect it to function. All right. Permissions applied directly to an object take precedence over permissions inherited. Permissions from different user groups that are at the same level are cumulative. So if I'm in a member of Group A and a member of Group B. If I have Group A, if I have write access to a folder, let's do some drawing here. So I'm a user. I'm in both Group A and I'm in Group B. And Group A gives me the ability to read this. So we'll do a read. Now, ironically, I'm going to do my file permissions like Linux here, where I just do simple read and writes. And I do appreciate Linux permissions, but NTFS permissions allow you to do more nuance. So they're a little bit more complicated, but it's a little bit more powerful. I know to a lot of Linux users, they're not happy when I say that, but it is what it is. So I'm a member of Group A and a member of Group B. So now I have readability and writability. Now this is the power of it, right? So if I'm a user and I'm a member of both these groups, so by the way, in the world of, if you take Windows 2, we'll talk about this. In the world of Active Directory administration, what I do is I create a group. I don't call it Group A. What I call it is, well, in this case, it's folder 1B, right? I'll call it folder 1B read group, and I call this folder 1B write group, right? No pun intended. Sorry. Correct. So now I have F1B read, FB write as groups. Now let's say for whatever reason, user 1 gets demoted, gets kicked out of the project meeting, gets whatever. User 1 is no longer allowed to write to that file. That's or anything under this in this folder. All I have to do is remove user 1. If I remove user 1 from that group, they do not have the ability to write to that file. They can read to it still, but they can't write to it. Again, that's the reason why we do that type of stuff. But remember, they're cumulative. So the original point is this. We have an accumulation of reads and writes. Okay. So in class, normally I would go through a lot of different scenarios, and let's do through a basic scenario here. So user 1's a member of group A and group B. User 2 is a member of group A only, but also group C. User 3 is a member of group C and group B. All right. So just keep that in mind. There's a lot going on there, but we can do it. All right. So let's look at group A. Group A has the ability, it has read, right? I'm sorry, read. Let's just give it read and write abilities here. However, group B takes away write at the folder level here. Okay, folder 1B, for a reason they're not allowed to. Sorry for the awkward pause, I just sneezed. So for a reason, group B is not allowed to write to this folder, anything below this folder, right? So let's see how that would play out. Okay, so we would have user 1 over here has the ability to read and write because they're in group A. It gets inherited down to this folder. So let's say they go to double click this folder. They open it up, they can read it. There's the permission to read it. However, when they get to that folder, the ability to write it was taken away at this folder. If we disable inheritance, that's a different story, which, by the way, you can disable inheritance. Let me show you where you can do that. So if I'm pretty sure I clicked on that. It's just not popping up. That's weird. Oh, because I have the draw tool. Oh, I'm going to lose all that draw stuff. Oh, that stinks. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I'm going to lose all those drawings that we just made. If you want to disable inheritance, you go down to properties, permissions. You can disable inheritance right here. So now watch. I'm going to lose all that awesome drawing. Yep. Sorry about that. All right. So let's click back on drawing. User 1 was a member of these two groups, right? And we had read and write. So really I should plus read and write, plus write. And then group B took away the ability to write. So if we have inheritance here, this write will overkick it. Now let's just say for whatever strange reason, group A, yeah, so let's say group C has the ability to write to this folder, okay? And again, user 1's also a member of group C. Okay, so what that's going to do is when I open up that file, actually, an explicit, implicit. And now I'm messing the word up left and right. So that explicit, I'm going to go with explicit permission that's directly to that file is going to give the ability to write to group to user 1. Okay, because an explicit permit is more powerful than an inherited deny. So this was denied, their ability to write was denied here with group B, but it was inherited, and since I have an explicit, it's going to overwrite it. Okay? Again, this can get really complicated. So this can get really complicated really quickly, and luckily we have our good friend, as I showed you before. I'm going to get rid of these lines again, which is effective access. Effective access is a really powerful tool, because what I can do is I can change, I can put any user in here or any group for that matter, users. And if I click on users, I click on view effective access. It's going to tell me what access that group or that user has. Okay, so believe me, that is a very powerful tool that makes Active Directory administrators quite happy. So keep that in mind as well. All right, let's not go too crazy with that. So effective permissions, we just talked about that. Permission semi-permanence. So if you remember back in attributes, how attributes sometimes moved with a file, sometimes they didn't move with a file, depending on the situation. Same rules apply here. Remember, when I take a file, and here's my bad drawing of a file, right? So, document with writing on it. If I move it to a different part of the hard drive within the same volume, what really happens is I don't really actually move that file. I don't physically pick it up and move it to a different part of the hard drive, right? The location of a file isn't a matter of actual physical location, right? So let's pick on C, users, you know, we got our CIT admin, CIT admin. There's a lot to write out. I'm just going to put admin, all right? So I got a file here, right? Whatever, we're going to call it test again, right? So I have this test file, right? .txt. Okay. And I'm going to move that test.txt and let's put it on the desktop. Well, let's put the root of C since it's easy to write. So we're going to move it to the root of C, right? So C, and what I'm doing is I'm moving that file from the root of my profile, which doesn't make much sense. It really should be under desktop or documents. But I'm going to move it to test.txt. Okay. If I move it to the root of C, okay, what that buys me is nothing. It's just the location. Now it's going to change the permission rules and all that stuff, but really this is for us stupid humans. Let's face facts. We're not actually changing a location on the hard drive. It doesn't move the file to a different location on the platter or to the memory of the SSD drive, right? What it's doing is it's just changing a setting, right, on that file. Where are you located? Where does the stupid human think you live, right? So when it moves a file, all it's doing is changing its pointer, is all it's really doing, okay? So if that's the case, the file doesn't get deleted and rebuilt, all right? So if it's copied within the same volume, it gets its parent's permissions, okay? So, if it's copied within the same volume, oh, okay, that's copied. If it's moved, if it's moved within the same volume, it keeps its permissions. Why? Because nothing's really happened. All you did was you change the setting in the file. Where is it located? Parentheses, a quotation mark located, right? That's all you did. Okay, if you copy it within the same volume, however, what you're doing is you're creating a copy. You're taking that file and you're just copying the data over. And then what you're doing, so in a copy situation, we took this file, we made another copy, and we're moving that over is what we're doing. Okay, so this copy then gets moved over to this new location. So there's one copy that exists here, and there's another copy that exists here. If we're copying it, then whatever the parent permissions get copied over as the permissions. Okay, if copied or moved to a different volume, again, if it's a different volume, all bets are off because we actually have to copy the file. We're actually going to have to copy the file. So if you copy the file, it's going to get its parents' permissions. If you just move it within the same volume, it's going to keep its current permissions. All right, to simplify it as much as possible. So, starting with Windows 12 Vista, there was a cultural change towards security. Vista, Microsoft started saying, you know what, we should probably take this security thing a little serious. UAC was introduced, user access control, to poor reviews. So click on this link. This is the classic. Pause the video, click on this link, and watch the video. It's a old cartoon that Macintosh has bashed Windows Vista with, starring John Hodgman and Justin Long, I think was the other actor. John Hodgman, I'm a fan of John Hodgman. So anyway, the point is John Hodgman played the PC, and of course Windows bashed it. So watch the video. Pause this video. All right, so we're back. All right, user access control is what they're complaining about, what they're joking about. That's that thing that pops up and says, are you sure you want to do this? If you want to download software, run software, that kind of thing. The way it works is this. When you log in, to run any normal software, it takes one token. To run administrative software, it takes two tokens. What happens is when you first log in, you're given one token. Just think about like taking a ride at the Big E, right? You're given a token. the expedition, the Eastern States expedition, right? You're gonna run a ride. So it takes how many tokens to take this ride? You're given 1 token as soon as you're walked in. If you're an administrator, what will happen is you'll get a prompt. Do you want this second token to run this as an administrator? That's how the system works. Okay. It took time for software to adjust to the new reality. So this line is rhetorical. No, never give your users administrative access. Okay, administrative access is for administrators. All right. If you're supporting an office, they should be logged in as standard users. If they need to install software, let them call you over. It's more work. It can slow things down, but that's how we don't get viruses. That's how we don't get ransomware. That's how we stop. Again, NTFS permissions is the building block of NT security, Windows NT security. So just to give someone administrative access, yeah, you're bypassing the primary means of security. Okay. Newer software uses application manifest to warn Windows 10 if it is going to need special permissions, so it should ask for the second token. So when it requires elevation of rights, one can fine tune when UAC prompts for the second token. You do that if you do a search for user access control. I don't want web results. Let me hold on. Something went wrong there. Hold on. Let me user. Okay, there you go. User access control settings. So I just typed user, change user access control settings is what you want, and you can knock it down, knock it up. It'll tell you a little bit more information here. Obviously, it's recommended you stay at the default. All right. So let's move this. This is my slide thing, and I don't want it. Thank you. Yes. All right. And it's blocking me. All right. So that was weird. It disappeared for a second. Can you go away? Thank you. And account control settings area with Active Directory. So again, we can also make those changes using our good friend Active Directory. If you're a member of, if you're in a domain and you're part of Active Directory, your computer is owned by the administrator. I repeat that again. So groups are how we push down authentication. Understanding NTFS permissions. We have read, we have write. We have some other smaller ones, but read and write is at the core. Remember, folders and files have different file permissions. Ownership's very important because the owner can always change the permissions of a file. So if you really want to lock out a file or a folder from a user, that you can't make them the owner. Inheritance, permission inheritance. Remember that permissions can be either inherited or directly assigned. Actually be a real ACE of the ACL, and that denies generally take precedence over allows. However, inherited denies will not override explicit permits. And then you can have an accumulation of rights if you're in members of multiple groups. All right. Use effective permission. It is your friend. This, keep in mind, but the important concept is understanding how permissions are come to a file. All right, so that's all I have on this lesson, and we'll talk later.